For joining me here this morning, or this morning my time anyway, for the next 1 minute. We've got about 230 people with us. In this webinar, I'll compare and contrast Lightroom Classic with the cloud-based Lightroom, so you can decide which one is for you. Now, I don't have any agenda here. My goal isn't to convert you to the cloud-based version or convert you to Classic. It's really just to make sure that you have the information that you need to make the decision. When the cloud-based Lightroom came out a couple years ago, it was still missing some very fundamental features. So I felt that it needed some time to develop further. But now it has a lot of those features. So I think this is a better time to think about whether that's right for you or whether Lightroom Classic is. Now, with me today, I've got John, who's my office manager and assistant. He'll be helping us with any technical issues that come up. So thank you so much, John, for joining us here.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
In the chat panel, we have Kathy Eister, who is an excellent photography and digital imaging instructor. She'll be addressing Lightroom questions that come up in the chat pod. She's also, if our technique works, as I hope, she'll also try to pass to John any questions that she feels that would be most appropriate for me to address during the session. But I can't guarantee that that's going to work. So if after the session, the chat panel gets emailed to me, and I always go through and I read every single comment in the chat panel. So if I see questions that make me think, shoot, I wish I had addressed that in the session, I will address those in a follow-up email to you folks. It's great to see that we do have people from every continent except Asia. Now, I did assume that we don't have anybody from Antarctica, so that wasn't even a choice here. I just want to say to the 11 folks from Australia that my heart really goes out to you with the tragic fires that you guys are experiencing. So just know that I and everyone else are really thinking of you in these days. All right. Oh, we have two other attendees in the webinar today. Since my pet sitter is sick, we have Lucy and Milo, who are my golden doodles, my dogs, who are here in my office with me. And I'm hoping that they're very quiet throughout the session. But if they end up having some kind of need, then we'll just have to take a stretch break. I'll deal with it, and then we'll dive back in. Now, you may have noticed in the top left of your screen, it may be in a different place on mobile, there's a web links section. So clicking on those and then clicking on Browse To takes you to various sites on the web. The first two are for my video series, my training covering Lightroom Classic, Lightroom 5, and Lightroom 6. If you find that you're going to stick with Classic or you're going to move to Classic, consider that training. I'll talk about that a little bit towards the end of the session. Below that, a link to my website, then to Adobe subscription plans where you can subscribe if you're not yet subscribed, and then to some Adobe help pages on system requirements for both. Then a complete list, basically, of everything that Lightroom Classic has that the cloud-based Lightroom doesn't have, and then an article on how to migrate to the cloud-based version if you're going that way, and then finally, Kathy Eister's website. She's got a lot of excellent information on there. Before I really dive into the content for the webinar, I want to make sure that what I'm talking about is what you think I'm talking about. That when I say Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, that you know what I mean. There's been a lot of changes to the names of the Lightroom programs, and that's gotten very confusing. So I want to make sure that we have everybody on the same page here. So just a little history here. We used to have just Lightroom, and we had, the versions, Lightroom 5 in 2013, and then Lightroom 6. Those were the standalone programs. You buy them and you own them forever. Then, along with Lightroom 6, we got the subscription version of Lightroom 6. It was called Lightroom CC 2015. So you paid a monthly fee for that. The name of that program changed in 2017 to Lightroom Classic CC, and then more recently to just Lightroom Classic. So Lightroom Classic is just an updated version of Lightroom 6. It has some newer features, but it works the same way in terms of your images are on your computer, etc. Then in 2017, Adobe introduced a brand new application that they called Lightroom CC. So they stole the Lightroom CC name, put it on the new cloud-based application, which I'm going to give you a tour of today. Then last year rather, they took CC off of that, and now it's just called Lightroom. So now when someone says Lightroom, it's very hard to determine which program they're actually talking about. Sometimes I'll say Lightroom to apply to whatever version of Lightroom I happen to be in at the moment, which is often Classic. But technically, Lightroom refers to the new cloud-based application. I'll try to always say cloud when I'm talking about that one. Now that hopefully you're on the same page on that, I would like you to quickly let me know what version, if any, you are using so that I have a sense of where you're coming from here. Okay, so not everyone's voted, but the trend is clear here that most people are using Lightroom Classic now or an old version, Lightroom 4, 5, and 6, and you're wondering, well, what's this cloud-based app and how does it compare? There are 4 of you that are already using the cloud-based application, and presumably you're wondering, first, is there more to that application than you know, and then how does that compare to Lightroom Classic? Some of you are using both of them, so I'll talk a little bit about that later. All right, thank you for that. So now we're going to dive into the session. Let me go to this screen here. I find the camera distracting, so you're not going to watch me throughout the whole thing. I'm going to do a few slides, and then we're going to go into the cloud-based Lightroom. I'll give you a tour of that. Then we'll go into Lightroom Classic, and I'll show you how it compares. And then I'll come back to a few slides that cover additional things about the differences between the two to complete the session. Okay, let's talk about what they have in common. Both of them are subscriptions. So you can't buy a perpetual version of Lightroom anymore and just own it. You have to pay on an ongoing basis, and that's going to be the case whether you go with Classic. Classic has the squared off kind of grayish blue icon here, and then the cloud-based has the cyan in the rounded corners. Both are subscriptions. Both of them install and run on your computer, so you're not running software from the cloud. They both have a professional set of editing tools. So you'll see that they have almost the same set of tools to edit images. Lightroom Classic has more supporting features, features that support you in your editing. Both are intended by Adobe for amateurs and pros. Now, whether there's enough in the cloud-based Lightroom for you as a pro really depends on what you do. Same for amateurs. If you want to print, for example, you'll only be able to do that right now in Lightroom Classic. Now, this last point I think is important. Adobe is committed to continuing to develop both. I've talked to the Adobe folks many times, and they have stressed this. Now, does that mean that 10 years from now, both applications will still be around? I honestly don't know, and they're not going to make promises going out any particular number of years. But their goal is to support photographers regardless of which of the two apps you feel is best for you. This will be my last slide for now, about just a summary of the differences. Really what I think about as far as the differences at a top level. First, in the cloud-based version, all of your photos are in the cloud, and thus they're available to you everywhere. So they reside in the cloud. You'll be able to access them on your computer, on multiple computers, on your phone, on your tablet, using a web browser. They're automatically available everywhere. It manages and backs up your files for you. So if file and catalog management has been a big headache for you, then you'll want to take a look at the cloud-based version. It's easier to use. You're going to see in just a minute that it's streamlined, it's cleaner, it's less complex, there are fewer features, so it is easier to learn. Now, it has a few features, cloud-based features, that are not available in Lightroom Classic. They take advantage of the processing power of Adobe servers. So I'll get to that. And then For full functionality, for the best experience, the cloud-based version needs an internet connection. That doesn't mean that you have to be connected all the time. I'll talk about that more as we go along. With Lightroom Classic, photos reside on your computer rather than in the cloud, and they're organized as you wish to, so you manage and back them up. The cloud version, it manages them and backs them up for you. Some of you want to manage your files. Classic is for you in that case. Classic has more features for organizing and managing, for the supportive editing features I referred to, and then for creating output. So it really comes down to what I think of, as far as this particular point, it's power versus ease of use. Classic is more complex, but it's got more power. Now, you don't have all your photos automatically with you everywhere with Lightroom Classic. However, you can choose to sync groups of them called collections to the cloud and have those available to you everywhere. Well, I would say mobile and web, but they aren't the full resolution files. They're smaller, what are called smart previews. They're 2,500 pixels in size, which is fine for a lot of editing and sharing, but not necessarily for all sharing or all detail level editing. And with Classic, an internet connection for the most part is not needed. You have to connect to the internet every few months so that Adobe can verify that your subscription is still valid. And you have to connect if you want to use the map module or to sync collections of photos. But otherwise, you don't need an internet connection. Okay, so that's the really high level. What I'd like to do now, since most of you are Classic users and may not have the exposure to the cloud, is to give you a little tour of the cloud-based Lightroom. All right, now notice that it's called Adobe Lightroom because the cloud-based version is now Lightroom. One point I forgot to mention, and that is that this session is not a how-to session. I can't teach you how to use this version of Lightroom. I can't teach you how to use Classic. My goal here is to show it to you so that you have the exposure to it and can decide whether you want to switch, whether you want to learn. So here in Adobe Lightroom cloud-based version, I'll go to the book icon and we see all my photos here. Now, let's just go through a little bit of a workflow so that you can see how streamlined this app is. When you first get this, of course, it's empty. So you'll click on the plus and you'll add photos. You can browse your computer, select a folder, or if you've got a memory card selected, you can choose that. And then this is when I was shooting in my hotel room, so not the most fascinating images, but here in the import dialog, you can add them to an album. So albums are the primary way that you organize your images. I'm not actually going to do this right now. I'm not going to hit the add button. And that's it in here. You can uncheck images you don't want to import, but if you're a Classic user, all the complexity of the import dialog and all of the features in it are not here. So you just select an album, select your images, and you click on Add, and they come in to Lightroom. Now initially these images are stored on your computer as they're imported. But if you have an internet connection and if you have sync turned on here, they will automatically start uploading to the cloud, the full resolution files. And that's where the primary versions live, in the cloud. By the way, the cloud really means that they sit on Adobe computers and they're served to you here in Lightroom, whether on your computer, your phone, tablet, etc. All right. So once you have images here in Lightroom, you have various ways to access them here. There's a by date section that you can drill down to get to, images by date. But these aren't folders on your hard drive that you can rename and reorganize and manage like you would in Lightroom Classic. You don't touch your files and folders with the cloud-based Lightroom. They live within a library file on your computer, and you leave that alone. So the file management aspect is completely gone here. And that makes this a lot easier to use. File management and catalog management and understanding catalogs is the most complex part of Lightroom Classic. So you don't have to understand catalogs or how things get synced to the cloud or anything. You just have to work with your photos here. You can access by date. If you have people tagged, you can do that. But the primary way to organize your photos or to access them in groups that make sense to you is to create albums which are just like collections in Lightroom Classic. They're just called albums. You can organize them into album folders, which are just like collection sets. These are just virtual groupings of your photos. You won't be able to go out to your hard drive and find a folder called Molokai All. It's all virtual. Right now I'm showing a little bit of information around the thumbnails. You can see that you can rate, flag, and star. There's another view here that is just cleaner, that just shows images. But you don't have the ability to show all kinds of data around your thumbnails. It's very simplified. Now let's say that you just imported these photos and you want to sort through them. Well, you go through them in Loop View, assigning stars and flags, and there are shortcuts for these, but you work in Loop View. There is no compare or survey view here. I'll show them to you when I get to Lightroom Classic, but they are ways to see multiple photos at once. The only way to do that in the cloud-based Lightroom is to go to one of these two grid views. So let's say you've culled your photos and now you want to keyword them. Notice before I get to that there are no modules here. There's no library, develop, map, book, etc. So for those of you that wanted the Adobe team to get rid of modules and allow you to stay in one place, that happens with the cloud-based Lightroom here. These panels on the left are always here. You can click on the book icon here to collapse them, but you're always in the same view. And then you have tools along here to access features you can use. Here's the keyword tag one here. So I can add water as a keyword. Notice that that's all I can do here. I can't create hierarchies of keywords, organize my keywords. I can just add keywords to images. Let's click on the information button here. We see data about the image. It's called metadata. So we see camera information, exposure, title and caption, and you can click here and you can type them. Copyright. You can edit this here. You can also set your preferences to automatically apply this as you import. You can see the file name, capture date, and if there's no GPS information on the photo, you can add it. If there was GPS information on this photo, you would see a map down here so you could see where the photo was taken. But there's no map module for dragging this to the map if it's not GPS, if it doesn't have GPS coordinates. You can't see all of your photos on a map. Those features aren't here. All right, so keywords. Let's go to a photo that has people in it just so that I can show you people view here. So if I go back into keywording, you'll see that Lightroom found a person. So I can add a name for that person. That's comparable to face tagging in Lightroom Classic. It doesn't have as much functionality though. This person was not tagged. Lightroom didn't detect this person as a person. There's no way to draw a face region like you could in Lightroom Classic and then tag this person. All you could do with this person is add a regular keyword with their name. We've added stars and flags and keyworded, and we may have people. The next question that comes up is, given that I have data associated with my photos, how do I find my photos? So let's go to all photos and search the entire catalog, and I'll type G for grid view. There's a search bar here that I'll get to in a minute, but there's a filter icon that I want to start with. This is similar to the library filter bar in Lightroom Classic. So I can see all of my 3 or more star photos, for example. So we have flags, videos versus photos, etc., filtered by keywords. So some of the metadata. It is much less of the metadata than you can filter with in Lightroom Classic. You do have some additional metadata features. If I click in here, I start to see other settings that I can filter on. So if I filter on focal length, let's say I want to look at my wide angle lens photos, I can select from this list that's populated with the angles of all of the images in my catalog. The problem is, though, that I can't select from 20 to 30. I can only select one at a time. So that is more limited. Now, you can also just search here. Now, filtering doesn't require an internet connection, and it's precise. You get every photo with a particular keyword or camera. Search, to start with, requires that you're connected to the internet and that the photos that you've imported have already synced to the cloud. So this won't work right away after you import images. So let's find dogs. Well, here's some great dog photos, and they're all dogs, so that's great. Well, guess what? I have not keyworded these photos with dog. Lightroom on the Adobe servers has analyzed the content of my images, determined that there are dogs in these photos, and it served them up to me here. So this is generated by Adobe Sensei, which is their artificial intelligence machine learning technology. And it really requires the processing power and the analysis done on the Adobe servers to work. That's why it doesn't work without an internet connection. So let's cancel that and do cats. So I'm okay. Let me try one more. What I'm trying to do is get something with both false positives and false negatives. Okay, so I search for ocean. Okay, here's one that is not of the ocean. Well, it was a good guess by Lightroom. What I'm trying to get at is that you will have false positives and false negatives with this smart search. Here's a false positive. It's not the ocean. A false negative would be that in my catalog, I actually have more ocean shots that aren't showing up here. Just like I had more dog shots than Lightroom identified. That's because the technology is not perfect. Can't recognize all of the dogs in my images or all of the ocean shots. So this can be great to pull up a lot of images in a category you're looking for, but don't expect it to be extremely precise. So that's where still adding manual keywords can be important. But if you're the kind of person that's just never going to keyword your photos, cloud-based Lightroom has at least a pretty good solution for you. All right, let's select any photo here and let's talk about, well, let me just stop for a sec. Is everything going okay, John? Has anything come up?
Everything's going great for the people that it's going great for. A number of people do have audio issues, and some are just not able to be resolved, and they'll catch the webinar on the recording when it comes out.
Okay, sorry to hear that. I wish we had a solution for everybody right now. We'll have to keep looking into what the issues are. All right, that was search. Let's take a look at editing in the cloud-based Lightroom. Here's the slider icon indicates editing. These are also editing features here. But again, we're still in the same window we were in before. We've just got editing panels now that are open on the right. Now the cloud-based Lightroom has almost every editing tool that Lightroom Classic has. For those of you that know Lightroom Classic well, the ones that are not here are Range Mask, which is in the local adjustment tools that affect part of the image. Range Mask allows you to isolate particular colors or particular tones in a particular area and just affect those with your edits. So that's not here yet. It's a pretty sophisticated tool. I'm hoping that it will make its way in because I really like that. Red eye correction is not here for if you're shooting flash and you've got people with red pupils. That's not here in the cloud-based Lightroom. I've got to believe that that's going to come in the near future. I don't have any evidence of that, but Adobe's certainly aware that it's a missing, and I've just got to believe that they're going to be working on that. Okay, so red eye removal and range mask. The only other ones missing are in Lightroom Classic, there's a or a calibration panel down at the bottom that's got some red tint sliders, green shadow sliders, etc. Almost nobody uses those sliders and they are not here. There's also not the ability to work in old process versions, but that to me is not a big deal. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I think that's perfectly fine. So there's only a couple tools that are really still missing here. When I get to Lightroom Classic though, my dog is having a dream over here. If you hear a little bit of yelping, she's having a dream. All right, the show must go on. When I get to Lightroom Classic, I will show you the supporting editing features that I'm talking about that are there but not here. One example of them is step-by-step edit history. I can undo my work here in Lightroom Cloud. I can reset any particular panel of sliders, but I can't go back through my editing step by step. Speaking of the panels and sliders, in the cloud-based Lightroom, they're organized a little differently. We don't have a basic panel. We have a light panel that covers tonal controls, and then we have a color panel that has the color controls. The organization of them here in the cloud-based Lightroom is the same as it is in Lightroom Mobile and Web. So if you've been using that, then you've already learned that lens corrections is optics here in the cloud-based Lightroom, etc. Another thing that I like about the cloud-based Lightroom, particularly for beginners, is that the complex features are a little bit hidden. So in the cloud-based Lightroom, you're not overwhelmed with a ton of advanced features. For example, in the light panel, if you want to use the tone curve to brighten or darken or change the color cast of particular tones, you'll click on this icon. That'll open the point curve. You can get to the slider view, etc., or the parametric view. So beginners who are not ready for the tone curve and wouldn't know what to do with it are not faced with it. Same with color. The color mixer that allows you to affect individual colors in your image requires that you click on an icon to get to it. I'll come back to this in just a sec, but even something like vignetting, there's just one slider to brighten or darken the edges. If you want to refine that, you click on this sideways triangle to get your other sliders. So all those more complicated features are here, they just take a little bit more clicking. Now, as the Adobe team has built these features into the cloud-based Lightroom, they've rethought the design of some of them. And in my mind, they've done a really good job. If you're familiar with the target adjustment tool in Lightroom Classic, where you click and drag in your image to affect individual colors or tones, that's been redesigned here so that when it's open, you can switch from changing the color to changing the richness of the color to the brightness or darkness right here. And as you hover over an area, it shows you, so you should see an orange circle and a red circle. It shows you what colors are underneath my cursor. Then as you click and drag here, you're able to see what you're doing. So it's giving you more information. So that's just one example of where the tools have been thought out again that have a more modern design. Now, in addition to all of the edit panels, of course, you have the crop tool, crop and straighten. You've got the healing brush, which does cloning and healing, just like in Lightroom Classic. The brush is the adjustment brush. Then you have the radial filter, rename linear gradient. The three dots. You can copy your edits from one image to multiple images. You couldn't do this in the beginning. So now you can. You can specify exactly which settings you want to copy from one image to other images. So you have batch processing. You don't have auto sync. You can't work on them all together at once. And I think it's because that's led to a lot of problems for people in Lightroom Classic when they accidentally end up working on them all at once. You can't edit in Photoshop from here. It works just like it does in Lightroom Classic. So that's editing. Let's move on to sharing your images. First, anytime you want to share an edited image with the outside world, just like in Lightroom Classic, you need to export a copy of it. Here in cloud-based, you click on the share icon. You've got a few presets here with common export choices. And then now introduced in a recent version of the cloud-based Lightroom, you have a more extensive export dialog. So this was something else that I felt that this cloud-based Lightroom really needed, and now it has it. So you can choose JPEG or TIFF. You can't choose DNG at this point. Specify dimensions. They're just by long side. You can set the quality or compression level. Now it looks like that's it, but again, here's where more complexity is hidden. So to some extent, you can control what metadata is written out with the images, not as much as in Lightroom Classic. You can rename the files, and you can use these two templates to do so. You don't have the same control over file naming as you do in Lightroom Classic. Now, file naming here is just on export. You can't rename the masters in the cloud-based Lightroom because you don't manage files in the cloud-based Lightroom. Lightroom manages them for you. So it's only on export. Do output sharpening, change the color space. If you're used to exporting with printer profiles, you can't do that here in the cloud-based Lightroom. And if you don't know what that means, that's totally fine. All right, one thing I really like is that you have a preview right here. So if you change this, for example, to a very low quality setting, you'll see the effect right here. So it's an easy way to learn what some of these features do. I wish Lightroom Classic had that. So that's exporting. There are no output modules here in Lightroom Cloud-based. There's no print module. There's no printing. You can't even go to File Print. There is no printing capability at this point. However, there is a connection to White House Custom Color, which is a third-party printing service. Basically, you select your photo here, and then when you want to print it, you share it to White House Custom Color. I'll just click on Continue here. Okay. So this isn't an original photo. This is actually a version that came over from Lightroom Classic called a Smart Preview. And it's telling me that it can't print those. All right. So I'm not going to go through that, but it's very simple. Bottom line, you connect to White House Custom Color, and it takes you to the page to order your print. The problem is you can't order a simple print on paper. You've got to order it framed or image wrap or gallery wrapped, etc. So it's expensive, and you can't get the simple prints that you may want. There's also no book module here in the cloud-based Lightroom, so you can't design photo books right here in Lightroom. However, you can connect to Blurb's BookSmart software that once you download it would reside on your computer. Basically, that would send your selected images over to the BookSmart software, and you would design your book there. It doesn't work as well as Lightroom Classic. I'll show you why once I get to Lightroom Classic. The other thing you can do here is connect to Adobe Portfolio, which comes free with your subscription. You can design a website and get a domain here from them and have them host your website. So it's fine for sharing images, but not for creating output here in the application. So I think that's basically what's here as far as organizing, managing, editing, and sharing your images. There's one other thing. There is a Share tab here. Just like in Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Mobile, you can share albums with people. It'll generate a link, and you can send people to that link to view and comment on your photos. One thing that's unique about the cloud-based Lightroom is that if someone else, another Lightroom user, has shared an album with you, you'll be able to view those albums here in your Lightroom program. So that's kind of cool. Now, there's one other feature here that I really love that isn't directly about your photos. There are guided editing tutorials here and discover files. And I really love these, and I would encourage you to check these out. They're here in the desktop application, the computer application. They're also in Lightroom Mobile. They're simply more enjoyable on your computer because you're dealing with a bigger screen. They guide you through making edits to photos. Not only do you learn the editing tools, but you get exposed to how other people edit their photos. So I've found that as I go through some of these, that they take me in directions that I just wouldn't have thought of. So they've really helped me get better at editing as I get more exposure to other photographers. A lot of these are really well-known photographers, and I highly encourage you to check this out. In addition to the guided tutorials, these interactive edits or discover files, you simply see their edits here. You don't have to go through a guided tutorial. You can just click through the edits. You could also, in both of them, save their edits as a preset and apply that preset to your own images. So I'm really excited about this. I'm working on creating some of these of my own for Adobe, but that's not why I brought it up. It's because I think this is a great feature. All right, that's the cloud-based Lightroom. It's much streamlined. It's got a more modern interface. It's easier to use. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, I'll just go ahead and mention it now. The master version of your photos is stored in the cloud, but you can choose in preferences to also store a copy on your computer or on any of your hard drives. I actually recommend that because it allows you to back up your images locally, not just have a backup on Adobe servers. But even if you choose that, there will still be a version in the cloud. Let's move on to Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic is a lot more complex, and I'm not going to cover every single feature. I know most of you are using Lightroom Classic or an earlier version of that, but I want to expose everybody, even those that haven't seen Classic, to just how much more functionality is here and how much more complex things are. Now, when I say that Lightroom Classic is more complex, I don't mean that you can't learn it. You absolutely can learn it. And of course, I have training for it. But it's just a question of, is the additional, the steeper learning curve worth it to you? Do you value the additional functionality that's here? Now let's take a look at the import dialog where you add photos to Lightroom Classic. We have a similar thing here where we select where they're coming from, but we have a lot more functionality in here. It's just going to flash forever. Let me see if it'll stop flashing if I... Okay, it's just going to flash. All right, so let's say we have a memory card. We're going to try to ignore the flashing as it brings the photos in. Over here, there are some technical decisions that you can make if you want to. You can rename the files, the master copies of your files as they come in. You can apply a developed preset, for example, to bring them in all as black and white, just as a way to a starting point for your photos. You can apply a unique metadata preset. It may just be copyright information that you can do in the cloud-based Lightroom, but here you can add your contact information, for example, or other metadata. You can keyword right here if there are any keywords that apply to everything, and then you specify where on your computer the images are going to go. You didn't specify that in Lightroom Cloud because you don't make those decisions. So a lot more functionality, but a lot more settings and panels for you to learn. I'm going to cancel out of this. Let's say that I've brought in the photos at this point. Once you do, you'll see them here in the folders panel, which, if you set it up the way I like, shows you where all of your images are on your hard drive. So if I went out to Mac Finder or Windows File Explorer, I would find a Oaxaca folder in this folder structure on my hard drive. And I can use this folders panel to reorganize things. Move the Oaxaca folder to 2015, rename it, move images out of the folder and put them somewhere else, because I manage the files in Lightroom Classic. So I determine how they're organized here in Lightroom, which is the same as how they're organized on my hard drive. Some of you want to be very much in control of this, and you would definitely stick with Lightroom Classic for that. Now, along with the power to do that comes the ability to make mistakes. Now, a lot of you have probably seen question marks on folders, exclamation marks on files. If you take an image to the develop module, it tells you that the file can't be found and you can't edit it. Some of you, I know, have a real mess. Now, I think that you can learn how to not have that mess by understanding how Lightroom works with your files and understanding that you can't go out to Mac Finder or Windows Explorer and start reorganizing out there. But it is something that you have to understand and you have to learn. So basically, you take the good with the bad. With a cloud-based Lightroom, you can't make mistakes with this because you can't work with the files. Now, some of you know that the only reason I have question marks here is because some of my images are on an external hard drive that's not plugged in. But some of you have question marks and exclamation marks because you've made mistakes. Now, I have been able to split my images onto multiple hard drives. That's something I can do here in Lightroom Classic and not in the cloud-based Lightroom. Now, we also have a collections panel down here, which is just like albums in the cloud-based Lightroom. So they're virtual groupings. They don't exist on my hard drive like this, but I can create these for any groups of photos I want for projects or because I prefer collections for organization. I can put them in collection sets, which are just like album folders in the cloud-based Lightroom, etc. Now, I mentioned in the cloud-based Lightroom that your photos will automatically sync to the cloud. That doesn't happen in Lightroom Classic. You can choose instead to sync specific collections of photos. All these ones with the little symbol here are synced. So I've chosen to put this collection in the cloud so that I can see it on my phone, my tablet, Lightroom Web, and also in the cloud-based Lightroom application. So I have to manually choose that. It's also, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again, it's not the full-size master files that are being sent to the cloud. It's what are called smart previews, which are 2500 pixel compressed versions of your files. They're still raw files if the original is a raw file, but they're compressed versions. So they're good for general editing, but when you get to detailed work, the compression can interfere with them. You're not seeing the image at its best quality. So things like sharpening and noise reduction, you want to be working here on your desktop in Lightroom Classic because you don't have a full-size file. You also, once you've shared it to your phone, for example, let's say you export a copy of it from your phone to share it with somebody, you can't share the full-size version because you don't have that. You just have the smart preview. So you don't have all your images, all the full-size images with you all the time. Now you can put all of your folder images into collections and sync them, but they won't be the full-size originals. All right, down below here we've got published services, which allows you to manage exports to various services. Facebook doesn't work anymore. That's a Facebook issue, not a Lightroom issue. You can add additional services like SmugMug. Those aren't available in the cloud-based Lightroom. I'm just going to cover a few more things here that are not in the cloud-based Lightroom. Let me go to photos that are not missing. So here in Lightroom Classic, with the Quick Develop panel, we can edit. We can do some simple editing while we're in grid view. This makes it very easy, for example, to select a whole bunch of photos and crop them or boost the exposure. That's not available in the cloud-based Lightroom. We can keyword, of course, in the cloud-based Lightroom. It's right here in Lightroom Classic. We have a keyword list here that allows us to manage our keywords. We can delete them, we can rename them. Can't do that in the cloud-based Lightroom. And then, as I mentioned, we can put them in hierarchies. So here's a location hierarchy just as an example. I know Turkey's in Asia, but I'm not going to correct that right now, so don't send me emails on that one. I apologize if there's anyone out there from Turkey. All right. One advantage of hierarchies, not only can you collapse hierarchies you aren't using, but when you assign a bottom level keyword, you're assigning the other ones as well. So you don't have hierarchical keywords in the cloud-based Lightroom, but you have them here. Then we have the metadata panel, which has more extensive metadata about your photos and allows you to add more extensive metadata about your photos. So that's something that if it's really valuable to you, you'll need to consider staying with Lightroom Classic. You can also sync metadata from one photo to other photos. You can't do that in the cloud-based Lightroom. Let's go on to the Develop module. We don't need to go through the editing tools because I've told you that almost all of them are in the cloud-based Lightroom as well. But let's talk about some of the supporting features. I mentioned, let me collapse this navigator panel. I forgot to show you presets in the cloud-based Lightroom. Basically, they are saved combinations of settings that you can apply. You can apply other people's presets. You can create your own presets to easily apply the same edits to other photos. Those are present in both, so I don't really need to spend more time on that. Snapshots allow you to save certain points in time in the editing of your images. Maybe I edit this in black and white. I save a snapshot that shows me the image at that point. Then I go on and edit it in color. I save a snapshot there. Then I can just click back on those points in time in the snapshots panel. That's not in the cloud-based Lightroom. Step-by-step history I mentioned is not in the cloud-based. So if you want to be able to click back in time on your image, that's not available in the cloud-based Lightroom. Another supporting feature here in Lightroom Classic is Reference View. You may or may not be aware of this feature, but it allows you to have, let me make this one the reference photo, and we'll make this one the one I'm editing. It allows you to have a reference photo on the left. Let's say you're trying to match the one you're editing to the reference photo. So you can have the reference photo open as you're working on the main one. That's not in the cloud-based Lightroom. I'll go back to single image view. Soft proofing, for those of you that preview what your images will look like in print or in a different color space. It's an advanced feature, but it's not in the cloud-based Lightroom. Let me look at my notes here, make sure I'm not missing anything. One little thing, which may be a big deal to some of you, if you notice, if you look right here below the histogram, as I hover over the image, we see red, green, and blue values. Those tell us what color is under the cursor. That's not available in the cloud-based version. That's pretty much it as far as editing. I already mentioned that there's kind of a sync where you can copy settings from one image to another, but not auto sync where you work on them all simultaneously. I want to take a second and talk about video. In Lightroom Classic, I don't think I have any video examples here, but in Lightroom Classic, I can trim any length of the beginning and the end off the video to make it shorter. I can also manage my videos with keywords and stars, and then I can edit my video using the Quick Develop panel in the Library module. In the cloud-based Lightroom, you can add stars and flags and keywords. You can manage them, but you can't trim them, you can't edit them, and also another feature that's present in Lightroom Classic, you can't take JPEG snapshots or poster frames of individual frames in your videos. So if you're using the cloud-based Lightroom, you would definitely need another video program to do those same things. All right, let's talk about export. Export, you've edited your photo, you want to share it with the outside world, so you're going to export a JPEG copy or some other kind of copy. You do that here in the export dialog. It looks a lot more complex than the one in the cloud-based Lightroom. I think that statement applies to just about everything when you're comparing the two programs. Things look more complex in Lightroom Classic, and at the same time, you do have more functionality. There are a few things in here that are not in the cloud-based. You can easily add what you've exported to the catalog, though most people don't do that. There are video export options here. You can choose more metadata to export. You can watermark your images as you export. That's not present in the cloud-based. Here in Lightroom Classic, you can actually design your watermark. It can be a PNG graphics file from Photoshop. It could be a text-based watermark. You control the sizing, the color, the font, etc. Not in the cloud-based Lightroom. In Lightroom Classic, you can save export presets if you do basically exports with the same settings all the time. That way you don't have to revisit the settings each time. You just click on the preset and you export. Now, a new feature was introduced recently where you can actually select multiple presets and export multiple versions of all of the images you're exporting at the same time. So I can get a full-size JPEG and a small one at the same time of all of the images I've selected for export. That's not available in the cloud-based Lightroom. The map module allows you to see on the map your images. If I go to all photos here, rather than just the collection that I was in, you can see your images, you can click and see them larger. Images that don't have GPS information, you can drag them to the map. There isn't all of that functionality in the cloud-based Lightroom. You can just one by one see your photos on a map. Now let's get to output. So we have book, slideshow, print, and web. So here's where you can design a photo book right here in Lightroom. This is not a well-designed book, but it'll give you some idea here. So you can have text and one photo on a page, multiple photos on a page. You can change page colors, put background images in. There's a lot of functionality here in the book module. Now, what makes this different than using the cloud-based Lightroom's connection to Blurb's BookSmart software that I talked about? Well, one thing I like about the Lightroom Classic version, let's say that I'm looking at this image here in the book module and I decide I want to edit it a little bit further. Well, I select it, I go to the develop module, I work on it, and then I go back to the book module and I'm good to go. With the Lightroom Cloud version of doing things, you basically have to share it multiple times to BookSmart software, so it's a little bit more cumbersome. Slideshow, you can design and run slideshows here from within Lightroom. You can export videos of your slideshow. They can be the slides, they can also have music. You can also export PDFs. So your slides here can just be images, they could be full-size images, they could have text. There's a fair amount of functionality here. There's even a Ken Burns style pan and zoom option down here. Print is, as you would expect, it's generally for printing to your printer, but you can also, in addition to these single photo prints, you can do multi-photo layouts. Let me see if I have one down here. That you either print or you save to a JPEG. Maybe you just want to share it online. So you've got different functionality up here, single image, contact sheet, this custom package where you can freeform layout photos on the page, picture package where you can have multiple sizes of the same image. So there's a lot of functionality here, definitely not in the cloud-based Lightroom. And then finally, we have the web gallery that allows you to design web galleries that you would upload to your website. So it requires that you have a website or web space. I would imagine, I don't have any data on this, that it's the least used module here in Lightroom, but it is available here and is not in the cloud-based Lightroom. In the cloud-based Lightroom, you've got that connection to Adobe Portfolio where you build a website, a more robust website in that service. I think that's it as far as what I wanted to show you in Lightroom Classic. I want to go back to my slides, but hopefully you've just gotten the overall impression that there's a lot more in Lightroom Classic, but it is a lot more complex than the much streamlined cloud-based Lightroom application. So let me come back here. I don't want to put you to sleep. I just want to make sure that I've mentioned everything. You're clear that classic images are stored on your computer. Cloud images are stored in the cloud. You can also choose to store a copy on your computer. Okay. I've talked about the internet connectivity. It's much more important for the cloud-based version. Now, let's say you're traveling and you have terrible hotel Wi-Fi. Does that mean that the cloud-based Lightroom is not for you? Not necessarily. You can work without an internet connection. You can import photos. They'll be stored locally on your computer. And then once you have an internet connection and turn syncing on, then they'll sync to the cloud. You just have to recognize that you won't have access to that smart search feature that requires the internet. You won't have access to tagging with people view. and you won't have access to those guided tutorials that I showed you at the end of my demo of the cloud-based Lightroom. But if at home you have terrible internet, then I think you have to think more carefully about whether the cloud-based Lightroom is really for you. All right, I believe I've mentioned these, but let me see. Classic, you manage your files. You have to understand how catalogs work, and you're vulnerable to making mistakes, but you can learn how to not make mistakes. You have to back up your images in catalog using third-party backup software. And if you want them backed up to the cloud, using a third-party cloud backup service. You don't really have to think about that when you're using the cloud-based Lightroom because it automatically syncs everything to the cloud, backs it up for you. Keeping a copy locally with the cloud-based Lightroom allows you to back up your images locally if you wish to. Because you don't manage the files, there's no understanding of that required, and mistakes are much harder to make. Now, I offer private online sessions to people on any Lightroom topic they want to talk with me about. And almost every single one I've ever done has been on how to clean up a Lightroom Classic mess. So that's kind of avoided with the cloud-based Lightroom. On the other hand, again, a lot of people manage their files very successfully in Lightroom Classic. They've either been wise enough to get training in how to use Lightroom Classic from the beginning, or they've gotten it later and then cleaned up the mess they had from not understanding it. Now, working on multiple computers. With a cloud-based Lightroom, because all of your images automatically go to the cloud, then when you install the cloud-based Lightroom on a second computer and you open it up, your images just automatically start to appear. You don't have to do any work to get your images and your work to show up on your second computer, and actually on up to 5 computers. That doesn't work with Classic. With Classic, you have a couple solutions if you want to work on multiple computers. You either have to store your catalog and photos on an external hard drive and plug that into the computer that you want to use and tell Lightroom to use that, or you have to, let's say you take your laptop traveling and you've imported photos into Lightroom there. When you get home, you have to export that catalog, bring it over to your main computer, and then import it into your Classic catalog. So it requires understanding and managing catalogs. Integration with Lightroom Mobile and Web. I've touched on some of this, but I want to just really make sure that I've gotten into every single point here. So the cloud-based Lightroom is fully integrated with mobile and web. If you take photos with a Lightroom Mobile camera, Lightroom Mobile is available in the App Store, both Android and iOS. If you take photos with its camera, or you take photos with your phone camera but you import them into Lightroom Mobile, they automatically sync to the cloud-based Lightroom desktop application, to your other mobile devices, and to the web. That happens automatically. It also happens automatically with Lightroom Classic. So the cloud-based Lightroom, all of your desktop photos are also automatically available everywhere. I've said that multiple times. All the work you do, editing, keywording, culling, is available everywhere. So any work you do on your phone in Lightroom Mobile will automatically appear in the cloud-based Lightroom on your computer. And then you've seen that the editing tools, well, you haven't seen this, but I've mentioned this, that the editing tools are classified and named the same between the cloud-based Lightroom desktop application and Lightroom Mobile and Web. You have the same light category, color category, etc. Lightroom Classic, mobile device photos also sync back to Lightroom Classic and to your other mobile devices. Then you have manual syncing of collections of photos from Lightroom Classic, but they're not the originals. They're smaller, smart previews. So photos are not automatically available everywhere as full-size images. A subset of them is available if you choose to sync them as smaller, smart previews. Now, here's something that, frankly, I'm not really happy about, but if you edit your photos in Lightroom Mobile or Web, well, this I am happy with, the editing will sync back to Lightroom Classic. However, if you keyword in Lightroom Mobile, maybe you keyword with your iPad on the couch at night, those keywords don't sync back to Lightroom Classic. They're basically on an island on your phone or on your tablet. So Lightroom Classic is not completely integrated with Lightroom Mobile and Web. Adobe has chosen not to build additional sync functionality, including syncing keywords from mobile to Lightroom Classic. That's also true with tagging faces. You can do that on your phone or your tablet all day long, but don't expect those names to show up in Lightroom Classic. That's the part that I'm not happy about, that we don't have full syncing functionality. And as I've showed you already, some editing tools are classified and named differently. Now, if you already have my Lightroom Fundamentals and Beyond video series that covers Lightroom Classic, the last video in the series gives you an introduction to working with Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Mobile and Web. I talk about basically this process in that video. All right, just a little bit more here. Okay, cloud-based Lightroom, we've talked about the smart search that's only in the cloud-based, the interactive tutorials, and viewing albums others have shared with you have to be connected to the internet. By the way, at the end of this session, I'm going to allow you to download this presentation in case it's useful to you. Sorry I didn't mention that earlier. As far as functionality, it comes down to ease of use of the cloud-based Lightroom versus the power, the increased functionality of Lightroom Classic. Do more in Classic, but it's more complex and it takes more time to learn. I'm not going to go through these features. I've mentioned some of them. You can read this presentation for the rest in the web link section, or once you get this presentation, you can click here to get to my blog article that has a list of every Lightroom Classic feature that's not in the cloud-based version. Let's get to pricing. Let's say that the cloud-based Lightroom has started to look appealing to you because you struggle with file or folder management, or you like the idea of all your photos automatically available to you everywhere or automatically backed up. Well, what would it take to switch? I'm assuming that those of you that are on the subscription Lightroom Classic and not using Lightroom 4, 5, or 6 have the Creative Cloud Photography program. You get Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, and then the cloud-based Lightroom with a little storage for $10 a month. Lightroom portion of your subscription is really mostly intended to allow you to try the cloud-based Lightroom. 20 gigabytes is nothing. All of your photos take up much more than 20 gigabytes. So you can dabble with a cloud-based Lightroom, but this plan, as it is, $10 a month, is really designed for Lightroom Classic users, whether or not you use Photoshop. If you wanted to keep this plan, maybe because you still want to be able to use Lightroom Classic or you really want to use Photoshop too, but your main work is going to be in the cloud-based Lightroom, then you're going to need more storage. So you're looking at least doubling your price here. I know these prices are not applicable outside of the US. I apologize for that. But if you go to adobe.com for your country, you'll see the prices available to you. Then after that, if you need more than 1 terabyte, it's kind of $10 for each terabyte, except they're only available as 2, 5, and 10 terabyte plans. So if you go from 2 terabytes to 2.1, you've got to get the 5 terabyte plan. So if you still wanted Photoshop and Lightroom Classic, you're talking about $60 a month. Alternatively, if you just want to go to the cloud-based Lightroom and that's all you need, then of course it's cheaper. With 1 terabyte of storage, which is probably enough for most of you, it's $10 a month, and then the same additional cost as you have more photos. I really wish Adobe would introduce 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 here, because if you go from 2.1 to 5, there's obviously a big jump. If you have 5.1, you're going to pay $100 a month, but that's a lot of photos. So that's the scoop on Lightroom Classic versus the cloud-based version. Anything going on, John?
No, I'm getting every once in a while a little choppy in and out of your audio, but for the most part it's good. If it continues or gets worse, then you might need to exit out and go back in or something like that. But I just go with it, see if it gets any worse.
Okay. All right, let me know for sure. I'm almost done here. I just have a couple more things. I'm going to spend 5 minutes or less. If you decide to stick with Lightroom Classic, I'll just introduce my video series here. Then I want to give you guys a couple polls so that I understand where you are at the end of this session in terms of which one you plan to use, whether you plan to switch. And then I will give you a resource sheet with more information and allow you to download this presentation. As far as my video series go, right now I only have training for Lightroom Classic and the old versions, Lightroom 5 and 6 here. I don't have training for the cloud-based Lightroom. I did just get an email from someone lately saying, I really need to get you to get to it soon because I'm not getting any younger. So I want to and I plan to develop training for the cloud-based Lightroom. I've not been able to get to it yet. I'm trying to think of ways that I can get it done more quickly rather than spending months and months and months developing dozens and hundreds of videos. It may be a series of webinars that you pay for and then you get the recordings for them. Of course, the webinars aren't as carefully edited as the video series are. I'm pretty perfect as far as not stumbling over words in these video series, but I'm definitely not perfect with that in webinars. But if you're going to stay with Lightroom 5, 6, and Classic, I do have 2 video series. And I just want to read this testimonial that I got yesterday from Winston Shaw. It says, I'm a professional marine landscape and wildlife photographer who's been using Lightroom for years. I own and have read cover to cover 3 different Lightroom books, so I wasn't sure purchasing Laura's Lightroom video series would be worth my time. Eventually, I decided to make the purchase, and all I can say is I wish I had done so years ago. Now, after hearing from so many customers, that's no surprise to me because that's the one thing people always say is I wish I'd done so years ago. All right, he goes on, despite thinking that I was pretty up to speed on Lightroom features, I soon discovered dozens of features, options, settings that I knew virtually nothing about. Time after time, I found myself thinking, so that's what that's for. Or, so that's why I've been having that problem. Or, I wish I'd known when. Long story short, Laura's Lightroom video series is the best Lightroom instruction I've ever encountered. The clarity, pacing, and detailed instructions and examples make learning Lightroom a real pleasure. I wish I'd purchased it years ago. And of course, I've also gotten lots of testimonials from beginners who feel that it's a great way to learn as well. This is for beginners and experienced users. I give a lot of guidance to beginners on which videos are most important to watch so that you're not overwhelmed with 25 hours of training. The Fundamentals and Beyond covers the most important parts of Lightroom, where you import, organize, manage, and share your images. The series is for Mac, PC, mobile devices. It's available by download or DVD, but I really recommend the download. The DVDs are not as up to date. Lightroom Classic is updated by Adobe every couple months. New features are added. And I keep this video series up to date in the download version, but I can't produce new DVDs every 2 months. So this would require you, if you got DVDs, to download updates. These are the regular prices for download or DVD. You can save 20% this weekend with the webinar 20 discount code. It's called a promo code. Use that in the shopping cart if you decide you're interested in this series. Producing great output covers Lightroom's book, slideshow, print, and web modules. So you make photo books, slideshows, prints, web galleries. And also I spend about 2.5 hours on important output concepts. What's color management? Why do my images look different in Lightroom than they do when I print them or when I share them with people? How do I calibrate my monitor and what is that? What's JPEG compression? What's size and resolution? How large can I print? That's all covered in there as well. You can use the same discount code, and if you purchase the 2 series, you can save 20% more compared to purchasing them separately. With both of the series, you also get additional benefits. With the Fundamentals and Beyond that covers editing, you get all the photos that I use for my lessons on editing so that you can follow along. Then with both, you get a full year of updates as Lightroom Classic gets new features and changes. You get membership in a Facebook group where you can ask me Lightroom questions. Facebook labels it secret. Bottom line is nobody outside the group sees that you're a participant in it or sees your participation, so it's private. Get a list of my favorite Lightroom shortcuts, 65 plus page detailed searchable indices with start times of each topic covered within every video so that you can easily get back to any topic that I cover. And then you can try them risk-free. If within 60 days you find that they're just not right for you, then you can email us and get a refund on your purchase. All right, that's it for my video series. I would say that if there's anyone in the chat pod that has my video series and has thoughts on them, please put that in the chat pod for anyone who may be interested. If you have any questions about these video series, you can also put that in the chat pod. Getting back to our topic, Lightroom Classic versus cloud-based Lightroom, I put together some resources for you here. Well, at the top I've got my website and the video series that I just discussed, but these resources pertain to the topic. So one thing I didn't talk about is using the cloud-based Lightroom and Lightroom Classic together, and I'm not going to go into that extensively, but I do want to say that it can be done. You know, maybe you generally like the cloud-based Lightroom, but you want to be able to still take advantage of some of the other features in Lightroom Classic. It can be complicated too. For example, if you keyword in the cloud-based Lightroom, those keywords won't make it to Classic. If you delete a photo from Lightroom Classic, it will be deleted from the cloud-based Lightroom, but if you delete a photo from the cloud-based Lightroom, it won't be deleted from Lightroom Classic. So they're just things like that that can make it complicated and can turn it into a mess if you're not aware of those things.